Do you struggle to obey God because you don't know the outcome? If so, stay tuned and I will teach you how to overcome the fear of the unknown. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So for today's episode, we are discussing the fear of the unknown. And I wanted to talk about this today because when you do things God's way, you are going to have to be okay with moving blindly. You are going to have to be okay with following God's instructions, taking risks, putting yourself out there, being obedient to the things that God tells you to do, and not knowing how things will work out, not knowing if this is going to be the key to your breakthrough or if you're going to fail, not knowing if this is going to open a door or if you are going to still be in the same place after you move. You are going to have to be okay with following God's instructions blindly. And for some of us, we have been staying stagnant on the things that God told us to do because we're so afraid of the unknown. We are afraid of not knowing what's going to happen on the other side. We are afraid of not knowing what's going to happen after we take this step. And we allow that fear to keep us complacent. We allow that fear to keep us stagnant. We allow that fear to keep us frozen, keep us from moving on the things that God told us to do. Sometimes God will give us a step, and instead of moving on that step, we will go back to him and we will ask him, hey God, what's next? And God is saying, I am not giving you the next step until you move on what I told you to do, until you move on the original step that I told you to take, until you walk into that first thing that I told you to do. Some of us want to have the entire blueprint before we move on the first thing that God told us to do. We want to know everything that we're going to have to encounter to get to our breakthrough. We want to know every step we have to take to get to our breakthrough. We want to know how things are going to work. When I walk into this step, am I going to fail? We want to know how many times we're going to fail before we see that success. We want to know everything about the journey before we even start. And God is saying it doesn't work like that. That exact mentality is the very thing that is keeping you stuck. That exact mentality is the opposite of faith. In order for you to see the things that God has for you, in order for you to make it to the other side, to your destiny and to your breakthrough, you're going to have to follow God by faith. And faith is not going by what you know. Faith is not going by what you see. Faith is going by your trust in God. You trust God so much to the point where you believe that he is going to work everything out for you, to the point that you believe that you can take this step because you are confident that even if it doesn't work this time, even if it doesn't work the fifth time, eventually it's going to work because God will never promise you something. God will never tell you to do something that's not for your good, that he will not work out for your good, that he will not work out to be a blessing for you. Fear of the unknown and faith cannot coexist. You're either going to fear what you don't know or you're going to trust God for what you can't see. And as long as you choose to fear the unknown, you will always remain stuck. You will never make it out to the other side because that fear is holding you hostage and it's making it where you can't even move. It's making it where you can't even obey God. It's making it where you can't even take a step into the direction that God is telling you to take. It's keeping you hostage. It's holding you hostage. It's making you stagnant, and that will always sabotage your breakthrough. I struggled with the fear of the unknown for a very long time. And in order for me to fully overcome it and come out of it, I had to ask myself a very important question. And you also have to ask yourself the same question. What is it about the unknown? What is it about following God blindly that makes you afraid? One of the main reasons why we are afraid to follow God blindly is because we are afraid of what we're going to have to endure on the journey. We understand that doing things God's way does not equal an easy journey. If anything, following God's way can be a lot harder, a lot hurtful, and a lot more difficult than doing things your own way. You might realize that you see faster results doing things your own way than you do doing things God's way. And going God's way also does not feel good to us. And some of us are so afraid of what we're going to have to face. Some of us are so afraid of what we're going to have to expose. Some of us are so afraid of what we're going to have to heal from on the journey of doing things God's way that we allow that fear to keep us stagnant and not even move into the things that God told us to do. We know that in order for God to build us up, he's going to have to break us down first. We know that God wants to get rid of some things from our childhood, some things from our past that we haven't healed from, and we don't want to heal from them. We want to bury them inside. We want to hide from them because they're too hurtful. They're too painful. We don't want to feel that pain. We don't want to cry. We don't want to expose how those situations made us feel. We don't want to deal with those problems. So we know in order for us to do things God's way, we're going to have to confront those problems. We're going to have to confront that trauma, and we're too afraid to do it. So instead of being obedient to him, we stay stuck because we know what following his way is going to encounter. We know that before God brings the success, he's going to bring the failures. We know that before God brings the promised land, he's going to bring the struggles. And we're so afraid of those things. We're so afraid of the trauma. We're so afraid of the struggles. We're so afraid of the hardships. We're so afraid of the storms. We're so afraid of the failures that we don't want to do it. That's why we go to God asking for the entire blueprint before we even move into step one. Because we want to know everything that we're going to have to endure, everything that we're going to have to go through to make it to the other side. We want to approach God and ask him, hey, how many failures am I going to have to experience? I see that I'm going to go through a season of lack. How long am I going to be there? I see that I'm going to have to heal from the things that happened in my childhood. How long is that going to take? That's not the fun part of the journey. That's not the easy part of the journey. That's not the sexy part of the journey. And we don't want to stay there. We don't even want to go there. So we want to see, God, how long is it going to take for me to be in that step? How long is it going to take for me to stop at that destination before I get to my breakthrough? Our fear of what we have to endure makes us afraid to follow God blindly. And God is saying the reason why he cannot give you the entire blueprint right now is because you determine how long you're going to be in those seasons. See, in the Christian community, we always talk about trusting God's timing. You always hear people say it's going to happen in God's perfect time. But sometimes God had a time that he intended, but you prolonged the journey. Sometimes God had a time that he intended, but the way you obeyed him, the way you did things, the way you followed him, how long you decided to stay here prolonged the journey. He cannot give you the entire blueprint. He cannot tell you how long you're going to be here. He cannot tell you how long you're going to be in each season. He cannot tell you how long it's going to take for you to get to your breakthrough, because that is dependent upon you. It is not dependent upon him. It is dependent upon you. See, God could have intended for you to get to your breakthrough by the end of the year, but because you have been staying stagnant all year, because you have been being disobedient and not walking into step one because of the fear of the unknown, now you have prolonged the journey. What you were supposed to have by the end of the year, you will not get till next year. What you were supposed to have by the end of the year, now you have to wait till 2025. He cannot give you the entire blueprint because the blueprint is dependent upon you. I know it seems scary to go through the hardships. I know it seems scary to go through the season of lack. I know it seems scary to heal from your trauma, but you have been focusing on the wrong thing. See, like I said in the beginning of this episode, we are afraid because we know that before God builds us up, he breaks us down. Before God gives us the promise, we have to go through the struggles. Before we see the success, we have to go through the failures. And the reason why you have been afraid to move is because you've only been focused on the first part. You've been focused on the healing part. You've been focused on the struggles. You've been focused on the failures. And God is saying, but you missed what came before that. Yes, you experienced struggles, but there was a promise on the other side. Yes, you had to face your trauma, but there was healing on the other side. Yes, you had to go through some failures, but there was success on the other side. See, you have to go through it, but you don't have to stay there. You have to experience it, but I am going to bring you out. See, that is just a place that you have to drive through on your journey to get to your destination. I remember when I took a road trip from Ohio to North Carolina, there were so many places that I had to drive through that we didn't even stop at. We had to drive through Virginia, but not one time did we stop in Virginia. And there were even places that we had to drive through that we did stop at, but it was only for a quick minute to fill ourselves up to keep going on the journey. It was only for a quick minute to get what we needed from this destination to keep going to our end destination. We had to stop at West Virginia to get gas and to get food, but that was only to energize ourselves and to fuel up our car so that we could keep going on the journey. And God is saying, yes, you have to go through this season. Yes, you may even have to stop here, but that is just to get what you need so that you can keep going on the journey. It is not the end all destination. It does not feel good. If I'm being honest, stopping in West Virginia didn't feel good because I was tired of sitting in the car. I wanted to get to where we were going. I wanted to get to North Carolina and enjoy my trip. It didn't feel good to be in West Virginia, but guess what? We got in the car and we kept going. And God is saying you can't keep going if you're too afraid to go through. You can't keep going if you're too afraid to even drive to the first destination. You're going to have to stop there. You're going to have to get what you need to get there. It may not feel good, but when you finally make it to your end destination, when you finally make it to your North Carolina, you are going to be so happy that you took this journey. So you can't allow the things that you're going to have to endure stop you and block you from doing the things that God told you to do. Stop you and block you from following God blindly. Another reason why we are afraid of the unknown is because, like I said, we know that we're going to have to endure things on this journey. And some of us are so afraid of losing, and we're so afraid of failing. Failing does not feel good. And sometimes when you already struggle with insecurities, when you already struggle with thoughts that tell you that you're not good enough, that you were never good enough to do this, that somebody who looked like you couldn't do it, that somebody who came from where you came from couldn't do it, when you have thoughts that are telling you things like this, failing seems scary. Because when you fail, you feel like that failure confirms that thought. You feel like that failure confirms what that thought told you. You feel like that failure confirms what your family told you. You feel like that failure confirms what everyone around you told you. And sometimes the problem isn't that you're afraid of failing or you're afraid of losing. Sometimes the problem is that you're afraid of proving those things right. You wanted to start a ministry, but your entire life you lived in the hood. You lived a life in and out of jail. You lived a life being in the streets. You lived a life selling drugs. And every single person around you told you that you couldn't do that. They said, who would want to listen to you? Look at how you lived your life. Who would want to learn about God from you? And God called you to start this ministry. And although he called you to start the ministry, it's not going to take off immediately. You're going to have to live stream yourself preaching and only have 2 viewers. And you're so afraid to do it because when the people who told you that you couldn't do it because of where you came from, when they see those 2 viewers, they're going to say, I told you you couldn't do it. I told you nobody wanted to listen to you. I told you nobody wanted to hear from a person like you. Sometimes you are afraid of failing. Sometimes you are afraid of the losing season because you feel like that loss, you feel like that failure is proving those people and proving those negative thoughts and insecurities that you have. You feel like it's proving it right. But can I tell you a secret? There's not one person on this earth who has never experienced a losing season. There's not one person on this earth who has never experienced a failure. The problem isn't that you failed. The problem isn't that you lost. The problem is how you deal with it. See, there are two different types of people who respond to losses. The first person accepts the loss. They form an identity around the loss. The loss confirmed to them that they were not enough. So now they formed an identity of thinking that they're not enough. They accept the loss and use the loss to never obey God again, to never put themselves out there again, to never try again, to never take a risk again, to never try to do something out of their norm again. But then there's another type of person. There's a person who understands that losses are normal. They understand that failures are normal, and they view it as a challenge. They look over the loss, they study the loss, and they ask themselves, what can I learn from this? What did God want me to learn in this season of losing? What was God trying to protect me from in this season of losing? How can I learn from this protection? They take that loss, they take that failure, they learn from it, and they use what they learn to do better next time. And they keep doing it, they keep doing it, they keep doing it until they finally perfect what they were doing, until they finally see the success of what they were doing. You cannot be afraid of losses because they're normal. But you have to make the decision of if you're going to make an identity around that loss, if you're going to make an identity around that failure, or if you're going to accept it as a challenge and learn from it to do better next time. Another reason why we struggle with the fear of the unknown is because deep down inside, we don't believe that we're going to make it out to the other side. We know that God promised us a blessing. We know that God promised to do something in our lives. We know that God has a history of not lying. Everything that he said he was going to do, everything that he said yes to, everything that you prayed for and he said, yes, I'm going to do that. He never failed to come through. But even though we know his history, even though we know his character, we are afraid that he's not going to come through for us. We are afraid that we're going to follow him on this journey. We're going to do things his way, and he's not going to come through on the things that he said. He's not going to fulfill the promises that he made. And when you are so afraid to trust God out of fear that he will not make a way for you, that he will not do the things that he told you he was going to do, you have to realize that you're operating in unbelief. Your fear is proving your unbelief. And instead of allowing that unbelief to keep you stagnant, you want to be vulnerable with God. Take that unbelief to God. Take the reason why you're struggling with the unbelief to God and say, God, deep down inside, I don't trust that you're going to make a way out of no way for me. I don't trust that if I follow you on this journey, if I follow you and I follow your guide and I follow your instructions, that you're going to come through for me. I don't believe that you're going to bring this blessing to me, that I'm going to actually walk in this purpose, that I'm going to actually see the success in this purpose. You have to be real with God about where you are. Don't fake it. Don't pretend like, yeah, I have all the faith in the world. I know that God is the God that can make the impossible possible. I know that God is the God that can make a way out of no way, when deep down inside, that unbelief, that struggle to actually believe that is the thing that's making you afraid to walk in his steps. Be honest with God. And after you're honest with him, ask him, God, help my unbelief. See, I'm not just speaking this just to speak this. I'm not just speaking this because I want to birth that. I'm speaking this because I want your help. I'm laying down my problems at your feet. I'm asking you to take them from me and help me. Help me overcome this unbelief. Help me start believing by faith and being bold enough to walk in the things that you told me to do. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Is this episode teaching you how to overcome the fear of the unknown? If so, I want you to do me two favors. Favor number one, I want you to leave a review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you are listening to this episode Leave an honest review and let me know how you are enjoying the show. And favor number 2, if you know anyone who struggles to obey God because they're too afraid about what's going to happen, I want you to send this episode to them. Let this episode motivate and encourage them the same way that it is motivating and encouraging you. Now let's get back to the show. See, what we don't realize is that our fear is costing us. We're afraid to move on the things that God told us to do because we don't know what's going to happen. But what we fail to realize is that our fear of the unknown is costing us more than it will cost us if we actually moved. See, when you move, you make progress. But when you stay stuck out of fear, when you allow that fear to hold you hostage, you're staying in the same place. When you make the decision to push past your fear and move on the things that God told you to do, even when you feel afraid, you are still making progress on your journey. You are still taking steps ahead on your journey. But when you choose to stay in that fear, when you choose to sit in that fear, when you choose to disobey God because of that fear, you are still in the same place. There are people who are moving and doing it afraid, and they are at step 5 while you are still sitting here at step 0. And then you sit here and you get discouraged and you bash God and you say, God, why am I still in the same place? God, why aren't you making a way for me? And God is saying, because I told you to move and you decided to sit. I told you to step and you decided to sit. I told you to follow and you decided to sit. I told you to trust me and you decided to trust your fear. And that fear has cost you so much. You were supposed to have that breakthrough 5 years ago. You were supposed to have that breakthrough 2 years ago, but you were too afraid to try. You were too afraid to follow. You were too afraid to follow the instructions that God gave you, and it cost you your blessing. Not only did it cost you your blessing, because God is merciful. Even if you did not move in the past, if you make the decision today to move into the things that God told you to do, God will still bless you with the things that you desire. But guess what? You lost out on time. Your fear cost you time, the time for you to actually enjoy that breakthrough, the time for you to actually enjoy that blessing. You lost out on time. Your fear has cost you your time. Your fear has cost you so much. It costs more to sit than it will cost you to move. You have to learn how to trust God with uncertainty. It doesn't matter if you don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't matter if your breakthrough is going to come right after you do this one step. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to learn how to move blindly. You're going to have to learn how to follow God's lead. You're going to have to learn how to hold on to Him and allow Him to drive you in this season. You may be uncertain, but God is certain. So if God is certain, if God knows the right routes to take, if God knows how to weather you through the storm, if God knows how to get you through the season, if God knows how to pull you up from the storm, if God knows how to put the pieces and where to put the pieces to turn your brokenness into a blessing, then why won't you follow His certainty? Although you are uncertain, God is not. This is why we follow God in the first place, because He knows better than us. But we just have to trust that He does. We have to trust that His ways are better than our ways. We have to trust that He knows what He's doing. We have to trust that He's going to fulfill His promises. We have to trust that He's not going to waste our time. We have to trust that He loves us enough to not play with us. That He's not laughing at us in these dark seasons, that He's not laughing at us in these miserable seasons, that He's not laughing at us in the storms, that He's not laughing at us when we feel disconnected to Him. We have to trust that He's there in every single thing that He does. Although we don't understand, although we are not certain that it's going to work, we have to trust that He's certain and He knows what He's doing. You have to move with uncertainty. And the first way for you to move with uncertainty is to stop thinking the worst. See, it's no secret that on our journey of following God, we are going to experience failures and losses. But like I said earlier, The reason why God cannot give you the entire blueprint right now, the reason why God cannot break down the time frame of how long you're going to be in each season, how long you're going to sit in each destination, is because you decide how long you're going to be there. Sometimes the losses and the failures that we experience on our journey was not in God's plan. Sometimes the losses and the failures that we experience is by us birthing them. The Bible says that life and death is in the power of the tongue. And normally, what we think in our brains is what we say out our mouths. And what we say out our mouths inspires our actions. By you thinking the worst, 9 times out of 10, you are speaking the worst. And your actions show that you expect the worst. You do not want to birth unnecessary hardships, unnecessary storms, unnecessary failures, unnecessary obstacles because you expected it to come by doing it God's way. Yes, it's going to come, but every single thing that comes is not in God's plan. And so you have to get out of the mentality of expecting the worst to happen. Start expecting the good. The reason why you are afraid to walk in the unknown, the reason why you are afraid to walk with uncertainty is because you have been expecting the worst things to happen. But if you would just think the opposite, see, you've been thinking, what if I follow this step and I fail? What if I follow this step and I lose? What if I follow this step and I struggle? Why haven't you been thinking, what if I follow this step and I see my breakthrough? What if I follow this step and I succeed? What if I follow this step and I win? Think the opposite. Stop thinking the worst in the scenario. Have you ever dreamed of making your voice heard and sharing your message with the world? Well, it's time to turn that dream into a reality by starting your very own podcast. I understand that many aspiring podcasters are held back by the worries of cost, complexity, and the time it takes to launch a podcast. That is why I'm excited to announce my new training program that has all the tools and knowledge you need to launch your very own podcast for free. My training will guide you through every single step of your podcast journey. You will learn how to plan, release, market, and grow your podcast from start to finish. So if you're ready to take a leap of faith and share your message with the world, click the link in the description below to access my new podcast training. Now let's get back to the show. The second thing that you want to do to move with uncertainty is to learn God. Learn about God's character. Learn about how God guides people. Learn about how God restores people. Learn about how God blesses people. Because the reason why it's so hard for you to overcome the fear of the unknown is because deep down inside, you don't know the God that you serve. You don't know the God that you're following. You hear about what people say about him. You hear about how God came through for other people, but you don't know him for yourself. And if you want to fully walk in faith, the only way for you to have faith is by trust. And the only way for you to trust him is not only to develop a relationship with him, but also to learn him. Take time to study stories in the Bible about God's restoration. Take time to study stories in the Bible about how God guided people. Take time to study stories in the Bible about how God blessed people. The next thing that you want to do to move with uncertainty is focus on short-term results. The reason why a lot of us get discouraged on our journey, the reason why a lot of us are afraid to move into the things that God told us to do is because we expect to take one step and that step to bring us our overall breakthrough. That big thing that you've been praying for God to do in your life, you feel like by doing one thing that God said is going to bring that overall breakthrough. But it normally does not work out like that. You cannot just take one step and see your overall blessing. It's normally going to take multiple steps. And in order for you to stay motivated on this journey, in order for you to stay obedient on this journey, instead of just focusing on the overall goal, focus on short-term results. After you took step 1, what happened for you? Did you experience success? Did you grow? Did you learn something from that experience? What happened for you? Something good had to happen from you taking that one step, but you have been missing it. You have been overlooking it because you have only been focusing on the overall blessing. But if you would just focus on short-term results, because those short-term results will build up into the overall thing that you've been praying for. Those short-term results will build you up to be the type of person, who can handle the overall thing that you're praying for. So instead of just focusing on the overall blessing and how it didn't come when you took that one step, focus on what you learned. Focus on the results that you got. Focus on how you grew through that experience. The next thing that you want to do is you want to analyze your thoughts. Isn't it crazy how we believe our fears even though they didn't actually happen? Our fears can tell us that if we follow God's way, it won't work out. And we will believe it so much that we disobey God. But it didn't even happen. We didn't even follow God. We didn't even see if that way will work out or not. We just took that thought in and accepted it. And so sometimes in order for you to move with uncertainty, you're going to have to analyze your thoughts. Why are you believing something that didn't even happen? You're proving this thought right without allowing the thought to prove itself. When you get a thought that is telling you something negative, when you get a thought that is telling you something that makes you afraid, I want you to ask yourself, how likely is this to happen? How likely is this thought to come true? Isn't it like a 50-50 chance? There's a 50% chance that it will not work, just like there's a 50% chance that it will. So why were you so quick to believe the 50% that didn't work instead of the 50% that will? You were so quick to believe the fear over God. Analyze your thoughts. Start asking yourself, how likely is this to even come true? How likely is this to even happen in my life? And the last thing that you want to do is do it afraid. Feeling fear is normal. But like I said, why would you give into fear that hasn't even proved itself to be accurate? And as long as you continue to accept that fear and give into it, you will continue to stay in the same place. That fear will continue to cost you. But if you get up and you move, no matter what you're feeling, no matter how afraid you are still making progress. You are still moving into your blessing. And eventually you will get to a point where you prove that fear wrong. Don't allow the fear to hold you back. Move no matter if you feel afraid or not. And so remember, there's a reason why you're afraid. Whether you're afraid of what you're going to have to endure, whether you're afraid of losing and failing, or whether you're afraid that you're not going to make it out to the other side, you're going to have to understand what is making you afraid, and you're going to have to face it. As long as you continue to sit in your fear, that fear is going to cost you. It'll cost you more to sit and stay stagnant than it will cost you to move. And so you're going to have to learn how to trust God and move with uncertainty, because although you are uncertain, God is certain. And in order for you to move with uncertainty, you're going to have to stop thinking the worst. Learn God. Learn how He guides, restores, and blesses people. Focus on getting short-term results and not just your overall desire. Analyze your thoughts and do it afraid. And so my action step for you this week is I want you to move on one thing that God has told you to do. And after you do it, I want you to write down and document one thing that you learned from that experience. Whether you gained wisdom, experience, a blessing, or even character development, write down something that you gained from moving on the things that God told you to do this week. And so that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave us a review and let us know how you like the show. And if you want to stay connected to me, follow me on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. That's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.